really around the fact that what's unique to our communities is that our communities have been forcibly removed from land again and again. And, I had this really cool conversation with my dad where I was kind of showing him, he was like, what, I wonder why I never heard about rock climbing growing up, and we kind of did this thing where we wrote out these timelines of, these first quote unquote like alpine ascents of all these different summits. And we were like 1930, 1940, 50, whatever. And like who was recorded as the first ascents, like these white European alpinists and climbers. And then I said, well, look what was going on in Indian country, right? And I said, so at this time, this is when our ceremonies were banned. At this time, this is when our people weren't allowed to meet in groups of more than 3. At this time, by 1996 is when the last residential school closed in Canada. For those who aren't familiar with residential schools, these were systemic industrial schools that were created, quote unquote, by the Canadian government to kill the Indian and the child. And so our communities were faced with systemic barrier after systemic barrier that were embedded within relations of violence and of dehumanization, and that were predicated on the removal and the control of our bodies in relation to land, the creation of reserves and the creation of settlements and things like that. And so, I mean, to see kind of where we're coming from in terms of how we reimagine ourselves in relation to land that's not cultural, which is around food, subsistence, and medicine and ceremonies. That's what our relationship to land consists of. To imagine ourselves doing something like skiing or rock climbing, like it doesn't make, when I didn't know what climbing was until I was like 22, 23 years old. I was like, what is that? Like, that's just, what's the point of that? It's really like, it didn't make sense to me. It was just weird. And it was through my partner, and he was, a climber in his home territories, and he kind of portrayed it through his photos and things like that, where he was really demonstrating, for me, it's about being on the land. And he was saying it and using the language that was reflective of Indigenous language that we use here in the North. And it made sense to me. It wasn't about the sport or activity. It was about being with the land and what that means in terms of his healing and his intergenerational healing as well. So that's kind of like the thoughts that I have around it in terms of, why, addressing the ways that our bodies have been pushed out of these spaces, and then thinking about mindfully how we reclaim our wellness also in these spaces as well, which is, I think a really important piece of this, of hearing what you're all saying too.
Thank you. Debbie?
Should I hit the unmute this time? So I think that, to kind of, this is similar to some of the previous questions, but to kind of play off of it, just in terms of normalizing it. So if the question was, how do we get more diverse faces, body types, and disabilities involved, correct?
Well, yes, that, and why is having the discussion around actually getting those diverse faces, body types, and abilities involved so important?
I think, like we said prior, just having the conversations, having people to see, people to be able to see other Black people out there. So having these conversations, normalizing the conversation of just Black people being in the outdoors. And I think it's, it's super ironic that BIPOC people, like, we are connected to the land. We're used to being out on the land. And now here we are, how many years later, trying to reconnect our people and get everyone back out, and here's the mainstream media that's controlled this narrative for so long. And I think, I just think it's time that we start sharing our stories more. That's why I was super excited, just to get this invitation to be a part of this conversation. I don't know. I think I could go on and on, but I think just really just having these conversations is just really important. And if we don't see other people like us in the mainstream media, then our kids are going to grow up and they're going to be starting from scratch as well, thinking that this again is not for them. So just kind of continuing to fulfill the legacy and break down the barriers.
Ayesha, what do you think?
I feel like in cycling, I came in kind of in the middle of the we've noticed women exist boom, where they were doing a lot of advocacy around getting more women into cycling, getting more women on bikes, creating more products and equipment for women. And it felt to me, because I, roamed into it, that it was going to be another instance of we'll get around to, Black folks eventually, but right now women is what's important. And I remember having a conversation with an employee of a major bike company. And he's like, yeah, we've got lots of diversity at the office. And it was a couple minutes before I realized what he meant was women. He had women. There were white women also in his office, whereas, the cycling industry is predominantly white men. And so I think it's important that we, diversify the diversity and be very clear about what we're trying to include, what someone said before, what does inclusive mean? What are we trying to do here? And if we don't incorporate all of these other underrepresented groups, we're just in this fight by ourselves. And I think we can do a lot more if we increase the kind of diversity that we're trying to achieve. And I think I've lost my train of thought somewhere.
That's
But
right.
but basically,
Diversify the diversity. I like that.
Yeah, it's important that it's not just hey, look, I'm a fit, able-bodied Black woman. That's still not enough representation, because there are all kinds of people that ride bikes, all kinds of people that enjoy the outdoors and enjoy all of these activities, and they also need to be represented. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. Melissa.
Okay, where to begin? So I have two trains of thoughts, right? So one is, I just get annoyed with the whole diversity and inclusion, because to me, it always feels like we're asking for white people to see us. And honestly, I really don't care whether they see us or not. What I do care about, which goes to my other thought, is the money, right? So if they have what we need, how do we get it, right? So we want to be seen. They have the resources, right? Because we don't have however much it takes to put up billboards of ourselves around the world, right? So that's what we need. We don't really need to be included in what they have going on. If they want to keep it that way, that's fine. I mean, I feel like the world is big enough for all of us to be here without animosity. And I'm not mad at them, whatever. Yes, you can put me and my thickness on a billboard in your clothes, because we need that. But why can't someone that looks like us have our own brands that we put up as a forefront as something to support? Whether it's a bike brand, whether it's a water bottle brand, whether it's outdoor all weather pants or all weather shoes. I just get so tired, because it's always going to be tokenism. And is that what we're after? Is it tokenism that we're after? Why? Maybe we could reverse it, or I put it in the comments. Why can't it be a go back to, or take back, or a Sankofa? It's always add me, look at us, we're doing it too. But no, that's not it. We've always done it, and quiet as it's kept, we taught them how to do it. I mean, when you consider how did they get to this landmass? There were Black people, Africans, Indigenous people who had to help navigate ships. Let's start there. When they got here, how were they able to survive? It was Black and Indigenous people. They brought food and seeds from other places. They went and took Africans from Sierra Leone to cultivate rice. Indigenous people had to teach them, whether it was on this landmass or in South or Central America, about cocoa, about corn, just how to survive. And here we are. We've let them put us in a position where we have to go and ask for the things that we already have within us. I just feel like the diversity and inclusion conversation just needs to go away. And how do we build things? How do we get their capital? How do we get their resources to get what we need? Does that make sense? We can continue to post on Instagram and Facebook and get our message across. That's not really the problem. The problem is the access to capital. And I think that's what the question should be.
That's absolutely a great point, and a good reminder for everybody to buy Black and promote Black and support Black people and support your own community, because white people have been doing it forever. So it's time we did the same thing. And Jessica, what did you think?
I think that it's extremely important to discuss how can we getting more diverse faces and bodies in the outdoors. And it's as simple as, for example, we all know, we are familiar of Victoria's Secret brand. I remember a few years ago when the plus size brand, the model came out, a lot of plus size women, they identify themselves with them, and they created more, which created more confident of them. If you apply the same thought process into the outdoor, as far as like us being identified with a model, with a face, with a body that looks like us, it will create more awareness and will make more people to participate in those outdoors activities once we see someone who looked like us. And I think it is important to have that identity in advertisements and TV magazines, because they help us to break that generation curse of, okay, we don't belong here, or we have to always be mindful or cautious of whether or not we fit into those spaces. So once we see that identity that reflect who we are, it will help us and others to participate in those spaces.
Perfect, thank you. And a bit of a follow-up question for you, Melissa. So in making the outdoors more welcoming, diverse, and inclusive, I know you said you don't like the diversity and inclusion discussion, but what role then do you see major outdoor brands having in kind of diversifying? I know you said we need to create our own spaces, but yeah, do you see us having space?
I absolutely do think that they need to be inclusive, not just of Black people that look a certain way, not just of Black people who might be a lighter skin with a certain hair texture, not just of a brown skinned Black man standing next to his lighter skin female counterpart, because we know those are the things that they'll give us, but they need to include bigger people, period. They need to include differently abled people, people in wheelchairs. We don't talk enough about things being accessible to people with disabilities, whether they're visible or not visible. But they're definitely outdoor brands owe us, because we'll put on a North Face jacket without a coin given to us, and we'll put it in our Instagram. We'll put on these Keen shoes because they've sponsored an organization. So now we're all freely advertising for them. They definitely owe images of Black and Indigenous people, and beyond just wearing an outfit. Maybe kayaks. How about building kayaks that suit everybody's body type? Because I am a kayaker, and I do know that is a huge problem, that people who are of a different size can always get into a kayak, or they don't want to sit in an open kayak just flat out in the water. That's not a thing. And so once you do that, I think it extends to everybody, and not just Black and Indigenous people of color. It includes white people who are being kept out. I think too, we don't, this is not our conversation, but classism is still a thing, socioeconomics still comes into play for everybody. We know we tend to be at the bottom, but I think that their mindsets need to change, the advertisers need to change, all of it just needs to change, period. Whether I like it or not, they definitely owe us, because we are definitely spending our money on those brands.
Right, thank you. Erynne, what do you think about the role that major outdoor brands should have in creating a more welcome, diverse, and inclusive space for BIPOC? Also, because I'm interested in hearing your specific take on this, because across the world and in Canada even, I find like the token color, a person of color, is usually Black, and it's not an Indigenous person, but and possibly, yeah, even fewer Indigenous people in are in advertising and just these things in media in general. So yeah, Erynne, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that there's media has done a really good job to either romanticize or victimize or invisibilize the Indigenous body and the Indigenous experience. And so portrayals of Indigenous peoples through media is like either in one of those categories, like the romantic, the stoic, you know, or the victim or the invisible. And so I definitely think that if we are going to be talking about representation, we need to be talking about also cultural values and protocols that go along with that. If you're going to be including Indigenous peoples, then you need to be having conversations around environmental justice and climate action and accountability to land in those ways, because we're not about to capitalize and commodify our cultures, which are land-based cultures that talk about the land as sacred, and our relationship and legal and law systems to land tell us how to live in a way that protects the sacred for future generations, not just for, you know, like that instant moment of representation. So like I personally, as Erynne individual, like I get my backup when I think about, you know, representation because of the consistent tokenization of, I think, many of our community bodies. If we are not talking about or having conversations around transformation and transformative change that reflect values, like what are the values of the industries that we're working with and for? Are the values explicitly towards queer liberation and land-based wellness and the accountability to these things, BIPOC leadership, not diversity and inclusion, but actual leadership? Or is it towards, you know, these quick little tick boxes of like, well, we have someone represented here, we have someone on the board here, whatever it may be. And it's like really doesn't require for long-term change that moves beyond these relationships and that are just totally colonial, totally informed by these colonial legacies, you know? And so I think that I'm really interested in the stories that are told and the stories that we tell our families and ourselves in terms of our relationship to land. And so I'm really passionate about, you know, thinking about film work and our, you know, thinking about how do we invest ourselves in storytelling that is really around the reclamation and the reinsertion of our stories, and our therefore stories as carriers of knowledge, carriers of governance system that can, I mean, totally just interrogate this idea of outdoors as object, the idea of access to nature as representation, and that's that. I'm also a huge like sci-fi fan, sci-fi nerd. Like that's my world that I like to live in. I'm a huge fangirl of N.K. Jemisin, and like that's kind of the place that I like to think about as well, as like, okay, what about, we can have these conversations in this time, but like what about the beyond, right? And so, you know, culturally we have teachings that tell us that we should be making decisions for now that implicate and that do implicate 7 generations from now. So we're a futuristic people. People think that our communities are like a past tense people, but all of us here, like we are here because our ancestors were futuristic and we continue to insert ourselves into our own futures. And so that's what I'm excited about in terms of thinking about how we can recreate and reclaim our relationship to land. That's beyond industry, that's beyond tokenism, that's beyond all of those little things, you know. There's a bigger conversation and bigger story for us to explore and to reclaim together. And that's why I'm so excited to be meeting you all and hopefully be hiking and being on the water with you and climbing with you one day and doing that with our families, you know? And so maybe biking. I'm not a good biker, but I'll try it out. You know, so I mean, I think slowly but surely this conversation is actually going to leave the realms of industry and leave the realms of their boardrooms and kind of those people who hold that economic power, and it's going to just come in and in and into, it's going to just be in our communities, and we're going to totally hold absolute leadership in those spaces and determine what relationship to land means for us and for our future generations as well.
Great answer. Thank you so much. Ayesha, as a professional athlete, what do you think about the role that major outdoor brands have in making the outdoors more diverse?
I think they have a huge role in it. I think for me, like what Erynne was saying, like with trying to navigate beyond the tokenism of like, let's just slap a black face on an advertisement, but having actual people in leadership or in the decision-making positions that will like affect the entire company, the entire organization, or whatever it is. But also I think companies and these big brands need to learn how to learn, like learn how to take criticism and understand that throwing money at things is not absolve you from anything that you're doing incorrectly. Donating to or supporting a Black athlete does not mean you can't support racist systems. And I think that's the thing that a lot of these companies are struggling with right now. It's like, oh, but we supported this charity, or look how much money we've donated to Black Lives Matter. So, you know, we care and we love Black people, so we're awesome. But if you call out, you know, the things that they're actually doing, that the values of their companies don't actually align with anti-racist values, then they completely shut down or you get a non-apology, but there's not really any accountability there. So I think big brands need to learn how to be open to a full reformatting and not just look at diversity and inclusion as a thing that can be fixed overnight. Like, oh, if we just do the diversity, then we're done. And that's just not a possibility. And I loved Melissa's, you know, idea of just completely taking it out of their hands and us being in control of everything. But as an athlete, like there's nowhere for me to go. Like if I don't race bikes with these white folks, I'm not racing bikes at this level. So I have to find a way to make the space better for the next person that trots in and decides that they also want to race bikes, because right now it's trash and it can be so much better. And I think big brands they're the ones that are funding all of this stuff. They support the teams, they support the events, they have the power to make these spaces better and safe for BIPOC people. They just have to actually understand what that means. And right now they think it means just throwing money at stuff, and it's more than that.
Great. Thanks so much. We have one more question before we're going to take any audience questions and open up more of a discussion. So there's a lot of racial trauma associated with the outdoors. For example, in Canada, all the provincial parks were created by the dislocation and in some cases the ethnic cleansing, genocide, and just general terror of Indigenous people. So how can outdoor recreation communities and brands work towards reconciliation in a meaningful and impactful way to better engage with Indigenous communities and the land and their land? Whoever would like to start, maybe Debbie.
All right, thanks guys. So I'm sure Erynne has a really good answer to this one, so I'm really excited to hear what she has to say. But I would think just allowing Indigenous people to be able to share their stories. So, you know, oftentimes we go to recreate at these state parks or these different trails, and it's not really recognized. The lands are not recognized. Now, some national parks might do a semi-decent job, but they're not really telling their stories. I mean, I know there's a lot of deep rooted trauma, and it's, you know, it's not going to be an easy fix, but I think just acknowledging that there is an issue, and letting the real story be told. I think history, the way that it's been told, is complete bullshit, excuse my language, but it's been his story, it's been the white man's story, and I think it's time that we get the real story out. And I think it starts with there, and I'm sure there's a lot more that can be done, but I think just acknowledging is a great way to start.
Thank you. Erynne, would you like to speak on this? I'm sure everyone's waiting on bated
Well, I
breath.
mean, I don't have anything more or less to say than anyone else. I ideally hope that this is something that everybody considers when they access the outdoors, not just Indigenous peoples. However, I mean, I think transformative justice and radical change starts and lives in relationship. I really care about relationship. You know, Indigenous peoples, Indigenous languages, governance systems, they are relational. So in the same ways that we talk about, you know, how to be in balance with land, those are the same ways that we talk about how to be in balance with each other. And so I just think relationship, you know, having, and, you know, centering, not even just leadership, but building spaces that actually reflect meaningful and long-term relationship, not just kind of like these pop in and out. Can you speak on this board, or can you do these, you know, can you come and share your thoughts and in your knowledge, but like rather honoring those relationships. That's something also that's very reflective of many Indigenous cultures, is reciprocity. And so, you know, compensating people for the work that they do, like it should be something that we don't ever have to ask for, but it is something we have to ask for again and again and again within, you know, relations for, whether it be government or community or, media and industry and things like that. And so I think by compensating and recognizing that many of us speak from lived experiences, we're also honoring those relationships. And that's an exchange. It's an energetic exchange that can be monetary, that can be otherwise, but our relationships require reciprocity, they require respect, and they require ongoing renewal. And so, and it's also needs to happen, I think, in a way that reflects place-based knowledge systems. And so if we're talking about recreating and being on the lands of, you know, where I'm situated with Saanich Nations, then that means having conversations with the 4 tribes of the Saanich Nations and saying, you know, how can we build relationships that aren't just about consultation or consult, but, you know, that are built on meaningful friendships and long-lasting, I keep on saying it, like relationships, because ultimately, if we are just these tokenized othered spaces who kind of exist over there, and then you call us up every once in a while when we want to have like these conversations, then it's not going to move, it's not going to transform. I know that I've had to address all of my own internalized racism and all of my internalized sexism and misogyny and all of my internalized colonization by being in healthy relationships with people who we do that work together in our communities. We do that work at the kitchen table. And so I'm interested in thinking about how can we build relations and then let the work extend from there. If we don't have integrity of relations with one another, the work itself won't have integrity in it. And we need that, you know, at this point. So I think by locating, you know, and recognizing that every territory, every community, and every individual has their own set of protocols and their own set of like relationship of place-based knowledge to places, then we can be a little bit more specific in terms of where we are locating ourselves, where we're talking, and where we're also doing the work as well.
Thank you so much. So I'd like to open up the floor to any audience questions we might have. If you have a question, just type it in the chat box and I will monitor that. And yeah, you can ask your questions. Not a question, but a comment. Sayana says, it really makes you have a certain respect and deep sadness for Indigenous leaders that honored and protected the land at the cost of their lives. You have more respect for the land and its importance.
While we wait for the questions to roll in, I just wanted to add to that last question.
Yes, please.
So here in the States, I don't know a whole lot about Canada, not gonna lie. But there's just like a general whitewashing of a lot of the history that makes it so that it's, you know, more digestible for whoever is trying to learn about something. And so I've recently went to a national park, and the stuff on the signs was actually like inappropriate and offensive and not an actual representation of the people whose land that was, even though it was about them. It used names and language that I was informed later on that was not okay. And so I just wish that these brands would take into account how they're using the language, how they're using these like indigenous names and like creating the names of their products or creating the names of these trails and creating the names of like all of the things that we're using in the outdoor spaces, and taking into more consideration of like how that is actually not a commodity that they should be profiting off of, but a culture and a people that is, it belongs to someone. And I don't know, that's been like resonating with me lately, how in the cycling industry, there's been a lot of pushback lately from our Indigenous advocates. And it seems as though like people feel like, oh, another thing, like when will they be satisfied? This is too much. And it's like, what you don't realize is that everything is messed up. Like y'all have been messing up from the jump. And now people are finally being given a platform to say it where you can actually hear them, even though they've been saying it for years, but now you actually hear it. And it seems like an overwhelming problem, whereas it's just been messed up from the start. So, yeah.
Thanks so much for that. Tara says, I have been working outdoor retail for 15 years and am now a store manager at an outdoor clothing store. What can I do as a manager to help with community accessibility and leadership in the community? What will create that lasting relationship versus throwing a Band-Aid on it?
I will answer, well, what I think, just a brief answer, but I think one thing that you could do if it's a local store to your area is to offer classes. When people new to the outdoors don't know so many things, they don't know what gear to buy, they don't know how to start a campfire, they don't know how to buy the things that they need. So I think one thing that you could do is to form a relationship and build community by offering free classes to people, maybe once a month. I don't know.
That's a great idea. Does anybody else have any ideas on that?
I would say that, and be mindful of who's leading those classes, and be mindful of how those classes are formatted, and make sure that they're actually inviting to the folks that you're trying to reach.
Good point. Chris asks, if you could go back in time and talk to yourself before entering the outdoor space community, what biggest piece of advice would you give yourself? Maybe Jessica would like to start.
I will say knowing your surroundings. And I say that because when I started hiking, I was just like I was saying La La Land, just like enjoying the outdoor and not realizing my surroundings, the people who was around me, knowing that I was the only one. There were many, many times that I was the only one. So I think being present and knowing, identifying who you are, where you welcome or not, and the people who are around you, it's important. And especially now in 2020, it's extremely important for someone to know where are you welcome. So if I can go back, I think I will definitely reflect on that. Because again, when I started, I was just like, okay, just exploring and not knowing that I was the only one. And also not understanding what my present maybe did to someone else who didn't look like me. And so I think that's important just to know your surroundings.
Right, thank you. Erynne, if you could go back in time and talk to yourself before entering the outdoor space, what biggest piece of advice would you give?
Oh my gosh. I knew nothing about rock climbing. And then when I got into it, I was like, oh, wow. It's, I mean, I definitely hit a point where within my climbing, I loved the physicality of it. I loved being out. I loved kind of the what it drew you to. It requires that you go deeply inside of yourself and kind of interrogate these fear, like this. It's really intimate for me, my climbing. But I got to a point where I was just like, fuck this, I'm not doing this anymore. I can't stand this. I can't handle some of the racist and violent and misogynist route names. I can't handle the conversations that I am forced to have with people at the climbing gym or at the crag or whatever, questions about culture, that just all of it was, I was so turned off from it. And it wasn't until I attended a women's climbing festival where I climbed with other groups like Brown Girls Climb and Indigenous Women Hike and other amazing BIPOC folks within climbing, where I felt like, hey, there's room for you here, And so I think I would have told myself, you belong here and your climbing also belongs to you, because you will feel pushed out and you will feel like this isn't for you and you're not for this, but you do belong here. And that's something I tell again and again to everyone that I'm in community with, especially to young people. I wish it was Color the Craig. It's too far. I couldn't afford it. Oh, it's like my dream to go. We're trying to think of starting a Color the Craig north up here in the north, so hopefully you can all come. But no, it's one of my dreams to go there. I literally cry when I see Color the Craig because it's so opposite of what we're accessing here. I mean, our community's growing, but it's still very much white dominant. So I think that's a message that I'm saying to a lot of young people too. It's like, you belong here, like, let's do this, and then climbing, like that physical part just completely takes off once you feel like you are emotionally welcomed and you're spiritually and culturally welcomed as well. So I love that question though.
Thanks, Erynne. Ayesha made a great point about athletic brands throwing money at Black issues to absolve themselves of their own anti-Black racism. On that point, what do you think about folks celebrating Nike for sponsoring Kaepernick? I saw a comment today that Nike is on the right side of history, and I just side-eyed that comment. Are they really though? Wondering your thoughts. Ayesha, would you like to continue on that point?
I don't think any of these companies deserve any photo credit or accolades or praise, because I feel like they're all still works in progress. And I think it's important that they know that. I feel like, the earlier point I made where they like sponsor these Black athletes or give money to charities, and that they feel like it absolves them from any other actions. Like the biggest example in the cycling industry right now is that Trek is a very large bicycle manufacturer, but they also have been providing bicycles for the police. But they've been like shopping around looking for Black people to sponsor to sort of absolve themselves from the negative rhetoric around them giving bikes to the police. And it's more successful than it should be, like just throwing money at something Black and saying like, look, we care about Black people, we've given $1,000 to whoever, and then they get all of this praise, and it's like it never happened, which is just not true. So I think, again, that companies should not be given praise for doing something that they probably should be doing anyway. And at the end of the day, them sponsoring Kaepernick is already making them money. They're not doing anything groundbreaking. They're being a company, they're making money, it's capitalism. They're not doing any favors, so they should not be praised for that, in my opinion. And even the companies that I work with, I'm very careful to never say like, this company is the best, or this company, you know, like, I don't think that's true. I think they're actively doing this thing, and that's what I will say, but I don't know. I just hate when people give brands, like, a company, they're not people, they're brands, they're companies, they don't deserve that. And I wish folks would, you know, be a little more critical of things in general.
Great, thank you. I'm just gonna open up one last quick question. Can anybody describe an instance where they felt discriminated against in the outdoors?
I could definitely add on that, since my last question, I made comments related to that. And I remember one time, this was actually at a lake. I don't remember where it was, but it was a family event. It was my mom, it was probably like 8 of us, and we show up to the lake, and we couldn't get in. And we didn't know that we couldn't bring our own food to the lake. So at that time, I didn't really speak that much English. My mom didn't speak English, so I was trying to communicate with the limited resources that I had at that time. And long story short, we couldn't access to the lake, and I felt rejected. And the lack of not understanding what was happening, why we couldn't get to the lake. And although I couldn't really understand why they were telling me you couldn't come to the lake, the body language said it all. So now I sit back and reflect and then just revisit that moment, and I'm like, okay, I was discriminated. Yes, I understand that we couldn't bring food, but it wasn't, I wasn't welcome. It wasn't, okay, you guys can't bring food, just take it back to the car and come back, that's okay. No, it was just like a no. And now again, I revisit that moment, and I understand that my family, we were the only one in that lake. And I honestly feel that we were discriminated for our color of skin. We just went out and basically to have a cookout at a lake that we were not welcome. And if you ask me, how did I feel? I felt horrible. And also not understanding, not being able to defend myself and to stand for my family, that was even more painful.
Right. I'm sure that was painful, and I'm sorry.
That's okay. And again, and I think that's why it's important to know your surroundings and know your environment. It's important to know where you are, who are the people around you, and being able to defend yourself and your family in any life event that you could find, that you will find yourself, that whether it's discriminated or feel rejected.
Thank you so much. Does anybody else have anything to say quickly before we wrap up? It's 8:30 now. If anyone else would like to say anything, the floor is open.
Well, I've enjoyed this conversation, so thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us, Melissa.
I agree. I just wanted to say, I know that we probably all have like just buckets full of these types of instances where like, oh, fuck, and then this happened, and then this happened. I mean, everywhere along the spectrum. I'm sure that's like a whole other conversation, but I'm more just real interested in being able to picture the future of all of your work. And I'm just really grateful to be in this circle, and just want to, you know, offer my community to you. And, you know, this is our community growing and growing. We weren't having these conversations a year ago outside of our communities. So, I mean, the fact that our work is expanding and we're becoming, this is kind of setting the tone, I'm really grateful for. So thanks so much for inviting us in this circle today.
Thank you, Erynne, for all your insights and wisdom.
Agreed. Thanks for inviting me. This was wonderful.
Thanks, Ayesha.
I appreciate the work that everyone's doing in their respective fields, and really excited to see, you know, just all of us on this call where we're at 1 year from now. But really thankful to be a part of this conversation. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks, Debbie.
Well, thank you all on behalf of All Colors in Nature. I'm honored to be part of this panel and being able to share and reflect and also educate ourselves in what's happening in the outdoors and how can we make a change out there. So I'm very happy to be part of this panel.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And thank you everybody for coming to the discussion tonight. It was great to hear from our panelists, and it was great to have the thought-provoking questions from the audience as well. Yes, so thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I hope everybody learned something, and I hope everybody continues to enjoy the outdoors. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.